You guys, we have our very first male guest on the podcast today. It is a big deal. So, Matt Gordon is the authority muse at the Educated Authority, part historian, part psychologist, and part marketer. Matt is a cult kingmaker. Through the in depth study of dozens of influential leaders, as well as historical marketing and propaganda over hundreds of years, Matt has adapted the best of those strategies to enable contemporary thought leaders to change the world. Welcome to Business as a Magical Practice, Matt.
Thank you so much, Sam. And what a tremendous weight to carry,
I know.
this whole
Are you
first
going to be
guy
the
thing.
first and last man? We'll see.
Yeah, right.
So I wanted to bring Matt on because I'm a little obsessed with the idea of building cult followings or rabid fans and how it just makes being in business way easier. And it's really all I want to have conversations around right now because I get a little obsessed with things and I just want to go down rabbit holes. And Matt is such an expert on this subject. I just can't wait to pick his brain. So Matt, first of all, we have to talk about your bio. What is a cult kingmaker?
Well, a cult kingmaker is sort of the best attempt that I could come up with to talk about that rabid fan base, right? Everything that I do in my business and in acting as a teacher for other business has to do with something I think you've heard of before. A mutual friend of ours taught us this phrase, and that's your 100-year purpose. And I am like all in on that. So what am I doing every day? What are you doing every day that is going to matter 100 years from now? And so when we talk about building a following, when we talk about authority, I'm really looking for like a generational impact. Okay. And so I'm not interested in your launch next week. I'm not interested in how this quarter is going. I'm not interested in you having a good year or not. We're talking about what are you doing in your business to, affect things, a century from now. How are you making the world better? So that's what it's really all about. And the way that you get that impact is not by acting alone, and it's not by just amassing customers. It's really all about followers and changing their lives. And that means influencing them really at their core and changing their beliefs and changing the way they interact with the world. So that's what that's all about.
And do you see the leaders and the figures that you study from history? Do you see that that's what they're doing? They're having this generational impact.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. So yeah, you mentioned history, and I'm a big history nut, but not in the way that we were taught in school. Um, I'm terrible with like dates and places and all of the sort of, I call it historical trivia that they teach in school, right? Well, when did this happen? Who did that? That kind of thing. And that's kind of the who, what, and when. But I'm way more interested in the how and the why. Okay. So, I've got kind of a personal story I tell about when I had a health crisis a couple of years ago. And I really spent some time trying to understand why it happened from kind of an existential point of view, and what the lesson was to learn in that. And, and I realized at that point when I was kind of doing all of that work that that's what history was supposed to be all about, understanding why it happened and how and then how that impacts your present and future. So in terms of the history, that's a really big deal. And so I'm a big fan of biographies and this kind of thing. And as I started studying the people that we've all heard of to some degree or another, I started noticing all these commonalities. And I'm like, wait a minute, why is it this person is just like that person? And yet they led totally different lives and accomplished very different things. And yet the strategies they use to build their following were pretty much exactly the same. And so that's when I came up with this idea of authority archetypes. And I kind of narrowed it down to a handful of different types of strategies that you could use. And I found out that everybody's got like a primary archetype, the main way that they do their thing, and they reach out to their audience. And then we also have, you know, a blend of a couple of other strategies as well in there.
Okay, you're gonna tell us what the authority archetypes are, right?
Right, right.
Sure,
I
everyone
guess I
wants to
better.
know.
Um, so gee whiz, how many are there? I think there's how many are there? I think there are five. And let me give you a good example of one. That would be what I call the visionary publisher. So some of the people there would be Walt Disney and Hugh Hefner, who were actually very much the same. Helen Gurley Brown, who started Cosmopolitan magazine, she would be in there as well. And also Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin in the 1850s. She really produced the first um, bestseller in literature ever, and did it because she wanted to make a point about slavery. So, yeah.
So with you said there's five different archetypes. Are all of these are like big leaders that were able to amass a following, but they have different strategies behind it? Is that the underlying current of it?
Exactly. Yeah. So you've got the visionary publisher. You've got the Da Vinci is another archetype, and that's the actually the only one named for an individual person. And that's because Leonardo da Vinci was like this super genius, and what he was able to do was amazing. So you know, not all of these people are thought leaders. Not all of them were, you know, leaders or politicians of some sort, but they've had that impact, you know, for decades, a century or more, that kind of created these shockwaves through the world. So we've got yeah, the visionary publisher, the Da Vinci. We've got the Messiah, who, you know, their strategy is kind of the sell it by zealot, I call it, and that's when you have the true believers that have lined up behind you, and they are out there spreading the gospel, right? You know, kind of telling your story and doing that. So that's your main way of outreach, you know. So none of these people, you know, most of them didn't write books necessarily. Most of them didn't have a website because those weren't around it. Like they were able to use their own strategies to do that. So we also had the inventor as another archetype, and that would be kind of like a Thomas Edison, Steve Jobs type person. And then we also had the adventurer, which would be someone like a well, I mean, today Richard Branson, who was just in the news earlier this year for his spacecraft launch. Elon Musk would, you know, his main competitor in the space race of the billionaires.
So
Yeah.
is this something where just because of them following their nature and their passion, people are just magnetized to them? Is that kind of what it looks like, or am I missing something?
No, so it is people following their nature and their passion, probably more than you think, because the reason that they are archetypes is the fact that there are things inside us all of us, that are hardwired. And so when we talk about building authority and we talk about, you know, the status of thought leadership and all of that, we're not doing marketing. We're not really selling, at least not the traditional sense. What we're doing is we're kind of going in and grabbing onto these things that are imprinted in people's subconsciousness, and we're taking advantage of those. And when I say taking advantage, I don't necessarily mean something, you know, terribly manipulative or, you know, taking advantage of someone, but we're taking advantage of the hardwiring of the brain that's already there. So a story I like to tell about that, about the way that our brains can work in weird ways, is back in the 2000s. I think it was around 2008. I saw a study that studied track and field runners. Okay. So have you ever been to a track meet or anything like that? You've probably seen something that runners call the victory salute. And you'll see bicyclists do this too. And that's when their arms are outstretched a little bit behind them, the chest puffed out, looking up, maybe eyes closed, right? And that's the person crossing the finish line, right? You see men do it, you see women do it. And this study examined a certain group of runners that did it. And not all of them did it, but most of them did, the winners. And what was interesting about this study wasn't the fact that they did the victory salute, but it was the fact that none of those runners had ever seen anyone else do that move in their entire lives. And the reason is because all the runners they studied were blind since birth. Yeah. So where did they get that move? They didn't see anyone do it. No one taught them that. It just came out as this natural expression from somewhere in their brain. And so that's one of those little subroutines that you and I have programmed into us that we don't really know how it got there, but it's there. So Carl Jung, so taking the term archetype, Carl Jung actually did a lot with archetypes, and he did it mainly in terms of fiction and story. And you've heard that kind of thing about how, you can take any story and it fits like into one of 8 different categories. And, the characters, they all kind of follow the hero's journey, or they're the mystic, or, that kind of thing. All of that has to do with the same science that we're talking about here.
I mean, what's the end of the story? Did the scientists ever figure out why that they were all going out like that, or is there any speculation? I'm sorry.
Not
What's the loop?
really.
I'm dying.
It may be kind of like an evolutionary thing to like make you look bigger or something like that to your competitors. They're really not sure,
Uh-huh.
but they do know it happens. So,
Oh, that's so
yeah.
cool. So let's actually scoot back a little bit. We kind of got into some meat of this, but why should anyone care? Why should anyone care about being an authority or a cult leader for being cheeky, or a thought leader? Why?
Right. Well, I mean, I think you answered your own question earlier when you were like, "Hey, this makes business so much easier." And in fact, it does. With online advertising and all of that, there are a lot of marketers who can very easily go through an audience, like a buzzsaw, sell their stuff, make their money, and they kind of disappear. Like, they get a good publicist and they're on the TV show and quoted in the article, and then they're kind of gone, right? So I don't want to sound derisive, but it's kind of a flash in the pan sort of thing. Here today, gone tomorrow. But the people that I'm dealing with, people that I'm talking about, they are in for the long haul. And so you've got people that are in their industry 30, 40, 50 years and see all sorts of changes. And they are just like right there on the tip top of the pyramid where all the money is, right? And so it's a question of influencing people. Like if you're here to serve and that's your motivating factor, that's the kind of thing you want to do, because it's not enough to be smart in public. You've got to secure the obedience of your audience to make them do what they need to do, right? It's about making sales easier. It's about making retention easier. It's about, I'm going to get into like numbers here. It's about driving down the cost of acquisition of your customer and driving up the average customer value. And that's a big thing. So that's the way that we do it. So, a lot of people
Wait,
uh
let's just unjargon that little line. So cost
right.
acquisition, meaning how much it costs to get a new customer.
You
And
got
then
it.
the other one was customer lifetime value. Is that,
Right.
and so that's if someone buys from you once, can you actually increase, can they keep buying from you, so the amount of money they spend with you is more and more, so it makes it so acquiring a customer is more worth it, just for super lean.
Absolutely.
Okay, continue.
Absolutely. It's running up that, I mean, back when I was a kid, McDonald's had on their sign, they had like 67 billion served or something like that, right? Well, if all of those people only bought one cheeseburger from McDonald's, McDonald's would not have been fabulously profitable. It's the fact that people keep coming back, right? And so that's what we're talking about here, is running up that customer value. One thing I say about that that kind of blows people's mind is when you have a book and you sell a book and somebody buys a book, what's their customer value to you? Is it the cost of the book? Call it $20. No, it's not. It's actually nothing because that's not your customer. It's Amazon's customer. That's the bookstore's customer, right? So oftentimes we have to take people that have this model in their head and say, okay, let's tweak it a little bit so that you control the relationship and that you are kind of in the driver's seat for how they spend, when they spend, how much they spend, that kind of thing. So those are just a few of the values of being a thought leader and what it's all about.
And for those of you listening who, there are so many of you listening who've already told me this, but if you feel like you have a book within you or you are already an author, this is so much of what Matt teaches is around how to actually make a profitable business around being an author, and some misconceptions that a lot of people hold around publishing books and how that just makes you famous by publishing a book. So definitely keep your ears perked if you fit into that category. Okay, so Matt, can you tell me, now that we're all sold on being thought leaders and building our following and building our authority, what are some mistakes that people make?
The number one mistake people make is that they feel that their information is enough, that it's all about what they have to teach, kind of the deliverables of the business, right? So if you teach someone how to do a thing, or if you teach someone how to do something in their business, that is enough. Well, that's not going to keep people around long enough, because pretty much no matter what you teach, you've got a year, year and a half, maybe 2 years, and you've said everything you've got to say. And unfortunately, that's not enough to get that lifetime value up. That's not enough to have that generational impact. So the way I tell people to picture it is, think of train tracks, right? What do train tracks always come in, no matter what year it is, no matter where you are in the world? Train tracks always come in what? Pairs. One on the left, one on the right, right? And so I like to say that the left rail is all about the stuff you teach, but the right rail really has to do more with your relationship with your audience, and the story elements and the propaganda around that, and you building that connection with your audience. That's the other rail of the train tracks, and they have to go together. So that's really important. So in terms of mistake, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt that's credited with this line about, people don't care how much you know until you know how much you care. And when I first heard that, if you're like me, you hear that for the first time and you're like, ugh, like that should be on a Hallmark card, but what's that have to do with my business, right? And and the fact of the matter is, and we can either get into kind of like the neurological stuff or not, but that is because people's brains literally limit them until you've kind of emotionally engaged them. That's the way the brain works. And it's all about, the layers of the brain with the root brain, and then, moving on up through that, to finally they get to the point where after they've made a decision about whether they care about this or not, then they can think logically and kind of take your information at face value. So I call it an authority misfire when you just go out there and you throw information out at people and tell them what they need to know. And they tell them, what it is that you do, and all of this kind of thing. And it literally just bounces off their brain. It doesn't stick. So that misfire is a big deal. So we talk about in my classes, we talk a lot about how is it that people can feel like you care about them, and how is it they can come to feel, a certain way about you. How do you build that emotional connection? Um, we talk a lot about story, and selling things with stories has kind of been hot for a few years now in terms of that. and I've got my own take on that, but uh, I want to be careful how I say this, but a lot of followers in any group are leading kind of a fictional existence. Maybe they're not really taking the action like they should, but they're taking the information and they're doing whatever kind of work they need to do in themselves to be able to put that in use someday, but maybe they're not doing it right now. That could be a part of it. Uh, it's using tools of fiction and stories to kind of create this relationship where if you think about like a novelist that has serial novels and people can't wait for the next book to come out, or they've kind of fallen by the wayside now, but you remember growing up,
The series
all of
I'm reading right now, and I'm about to get to the very last book, and I'm kind of anxious about it. So,
well, yeah, right, there you go. So you've kind of bought into the story. You think of soap operas.
hmm
Again, these are TV shows that went on for decades, and before that in radio, um, where the story is constantly changing, but also kind of remaining the same. And so, how is it that you pull people into your story and keep them walking on this journey with you to keep them captivated? And so, when I say captivated, it's beyond interest. They are absolutely, they're fully absorbed into what you're saying.
enchanted. Um,
Yeah,
so going back to our train tracks, are you
right.
saying that your teachings have to change over time, or are you saying that you have to be a captivating person that finds new captivating ways of explaining your teachings, or both?
It's a little bit of repackaging and restating what you've already said, but mostly it's the latter of what you just suggested. It's about being that attractive character. It's about pulling them into the story. It's about all of the things that make them kind of invest in being a part of your world. So you really are creating like this other world that they live in with you, and you're having adventures and you're exploring a theme or an idea, and there are characters again just like you'd put together a novel,
Do you find that your
characters,
clients
adventures, ideas, yeah.
do you find that your clients are really some of your clients are really upset? They're like, "My stuff is really good. Why do I have to, like, be a captivating person now?"
When I worked in kind of a marketing agency for a decade or so, I would get that a lot. People would say, "Hey, I've been looking for someone like you my whole career. What I want you to do is to market my stuff for me, and I can only focus on what I do. The training the dogs, the cooking of the food, the fixing of the stuff, whatever it is." And and I would kind of have to impress on them. And sometimes I would do it a little bit jokingly. And I say, well, if I knew how to sell to people that needed that service or this product, what do I need you for? Right? You've got to kind of take ownership of that. So there is a little bit of getting past that entitlement mentality. But when we start talking about the people that have had an impact on millions of people over many, many years, uh, that attitude falls away pretty quick because it's a much bigger job than just my thing.
Yeah. I was just asking because I get people sometimes, or I hear people talk sometimes of, "Oh, I'm my work is so incredible, so transformative. It changes, like everyone who comes and purchases from me, their life is totally transformed, and they get really pissed off that they have to work hard or they have to put the time into marketing and selling and learning how to do that. They're like, my
Yeah.
stuff just speaks for itself. Why doesn't, like, why do I have to do any other work other than that? So I was just
And
wondering if that applies to you too.
the more they've had to go through to get to that point where they can do that, so like doctors, people that are highly trained, highly educated, they have more of that attitude than most, you know. It's something that is very, very common, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I mean, as someone who really enjoys marketing, I'm glad that I already enjoy it.
Right.
And I get it. I totally get it. But anyways, going back to, I love what you're talking about with becoming a captivating character and creating a captivating world for people to step into in order to
Mhm.
experience the transformation. Is Do you have any, like, how do we wrap our brains around actually doing that? Is it literally creating this alternate reality?
A little bit. It's kind of a mechanical process once we really get into it. So we go way beyond just telling people to be authentic, right? And, all that kind of thing. We actually jump into the nuts and bolts. So one of the things that we do is we say, okay, let's work on your language. Okay, what words and phrases do you use that someone can say, oh, you follow Sam? Because that's what Sam says, and nobody else really says it like that, right? So what are your code phrases that you use that are your kind of like the real estate that you own in someone else's head, and the way that your followers can identify each other, right? That's the kind of thing. So we create the authority lexicon. We talk about being divisive, which is a big deal. You've got to be divisive. All of these people that have a school of thought, they're for something and against something else. They all have their version of good and evil, and so we talk about establishing that. We talk about, what do you represent to someone? What values do you represent? The idea of freedom in your business and being able to work where you want, when you want. Do you embody success where you are extraordinarily well paid for what you do, and you've been able to do things and have things that most people don't? What are the values that you represent to people? Those are all kind of the big idea things that we break down and we write down and we map it out, so that that whole strategy moving forward is baked into how you're communicating with people. So those are just a few of the ideas right there.
Well, all of what you were saying, I was like, we're building a cult. This is what we're doing. I love it.
It's funny. My wife and I, this weekend, we watched this documentary on, I think it was Amazon Prime, called LuLaRich, and it studied the growth of the LuLaRoe company, like did all the leggings with the fun prints, and I think there were some other clothes as well. And these, I mean, I don't know that they were smart enough to necessarily understand everything that they were doing, but they kind of like checked all the boxes, right? Like there was a certain look you kind of had to have. There was a certain way you behaved, a certain way you talked, and all of these people, I think one of them actually came out and said, "Oh my gosh, I realized I don't have a job. I'm a member of a cult." And it was like, that's the point. And they were doing billions of dollars before, the whole thing kind of a victim of their own growth and some of their tactics. But it's a fascinating thing. If you watch this documentary, I think it's like 4 1 hour long episodes that you can see on Amazon Prime. Well worth watching, um, with an eye toward what are they doing in kind of the recruiting and manipulation of their herd of people, right? It's
Is
fascinating.
it brand ambassadors? Is that who they're hurting?
Well, I mean, it's basically a multi-level marketing company. So
Oh,
they're recruiting salespeople who are selling not only, the fancy leggings and all that, but also the opportunity for you to have your own business and make, one of the big buzzwords that or phrases, catchphrases that they use was, full-time income with part-time work.
Mm,
So
nice.
a lot of the people that jumped into this were stay-at-home moms that wanted to bring some extra money in, but did not want to like leave the kids and go work full time, and so they found that huge workforce out there that was just dying to get to do something, and they marketed that in a very specific and very identifiable way. So yeah.
That's so good. Okay. I love it. I haven't heard about them at all. So I'll have to like I feel like I'm in this demographic. Why haven't I heard of LuLaRoe? Amazing. So what do people need if they want to be I want to be a thought leader and I want to have a following that loves me and stays with me for my entire career. What do I actually need in order to build my status and authority as that thought leader?
Well, you've got some choices to make about whether you're going to be a thought leader, an authority, a celebrity.
Oh, they're different.
That
Wait, do these pair with your archetypes?
Well, I mean, we haven't even gotten to the archetypes yet.
Oh my
We've got some very
gosh.
basic choices, about what kind of public figure are you going to be, right? You can make money a lot of different ways, like in your business, So, for example, you know, Kylie Jenner, right? I
Mhm.
mean, she's on like Instagram and TikTok or whatever, and she's got a
Yeah.
gazillion formulas. And if she wants to wake up tomorrow and say, I think I'm going to create a makeup company, by Christmas, that's going to be like a $500 million company, right? Well, I couldn't do that. You couldn't do that because we
That's
don't have
the
that kind
that's
of
the celebrity
celebrity.
one?
Yeah. I mean,
Is
that's
that a
just,
realistic route for business owners or in
um, I don't think I don't think it's a great idea. Now, I'm a big fan of strategic celebrity, right? Like nobody, in our world really wants to be so famous that they can't like walk through an airport or they're constantly interrupted at dinner, like for autograph seekers, right? No one really wants that. But, it might be, if they ever hold a convention of people in your avatar because they're in a certain career field or whatever, it might be really useful to like be mobbed there when you go there to show up, right? So there's that element of the celebrity, and then there's an authority, and then you kind of have the thought leader, and that has to do with your school of thought and all that. So the first thing I would do is you can go to my website and take a free quiz all about the authority archetype. I think you go to educatedauthority.com/quiz.
I was
You can take it,
educated.
educatedauthority.com/quiz. You don't have to sign up for anything if you don't want to, you can just take the quiz and get your result and do some research and start studying the people that kind of operated like you want to operate. That would be a first step. Secondly, you want to sit down and think a lot about language, about how you're going to talk. And third, you want to get some stories together. Um, and so these are really good ideas, like your origin story, right? Where did you come from? It kind of explains you, your mission story. Why are you the way you are? Why do you do what you do? Why do you care? That's a big one. And a lot of people, they don't understand the values of these stories. But let me give you a good example. Okay. Let's say an alien comes to our planet, right? And this alien is stronger than any man, woman, creature on the planet. They're incredibly strong. For whatever reason, the Earth's gravitational system does not affect this alien. This alien can go through the air, all that. This alien can see through walls and things like that. That sounds really scary, doesn't it? But what if you gave it a backstory about how, this alien's parents like sent the alien Their planet was being destroyed and the alien was sent to Earth to help people on Earth. Well, now you have Superman. All right. So the backstory makes you as a character way more palatable and way more relatable. So that's the kind of strength of what we're talking about here. You look at all the superheroes; they all have this backstory. So when they come up with a new Batman set of movies, right? You know that the first movie is going to be, why did Batman become Batman? And this whole thing with the parents murdered, and I mean, if you're a big fan of Batman, you're like, oh, I got to sit through this story again. But it's really important to tell that story, because if you don't have that, you've just got this creepy dude that dresses like a bat and runs around at night, hurting people. So
With it,
that's
I want.
the kind of thing.
Well, I want to look at superhero. I've watched so many superhero movies. It's like one of the genres that my husband and I both really like. So
Really.
we tend to watch a lot of them, meaning every single one that comes out. And and you see superheroes and you see their stories. It seems like their backstory is important for more common people, normal people, to accept power as not being a scary thing.
Yeah.
Does that align with someone who is an authority? There's this element of power to them that people don't find palatable, and unless there's this vulnerable backstory behind them.
So every attractive character like that needs to be able to have things that other people can point to and say, look at their superpowers, look at the miracles they can perform.
Mm.
Uh, how is it they do that? Why is it that they do that? Right. So yeah, I mean, this is very definitely a part of the formula, and I don't really have it written out as a big formula. Maybe I should, but it would be
Should.
crazy long and complicated, and I'd have to explain it for an hour. But that's kind of like my business. That's what the job is, to
Yeah.
teach people how to do this. So yeah, every hero like that, they've got to have, you know, where did he come from and why, and in a lot of our worlds, it's also important to have that victory over hardship sort of story. Like, this is my past and it was really difficult, and then I did this thing that I'm going to teach you how to do, and now this is wonderful. People need that so that they can relate to your before, so they can achieve your after.
Yeah.
So it's again making you relatable. So you'd better have that story. So when you talk to people that speak for a living, they have signature stories, right? And they are the stories that they tell every time.
Mhm.
And people want to hear those stories. Kind of like a comedian, like, hey, can you do the routine about the bus driver? Right? That kind of thing. Um, so yeah, you've got to have those stories, and you've got to have it really tight and dialed in. And we spend time on this because it's such a big deal. You got to have that story tight and dialed in, because if you're going to achieve generational authority, you need other people kind of glomming onto your story and telling other people. So they've got to hear it. It's got to be simple enough for them to remember and repeat, and go out and tell other people.
So we've talked about, so me or anyone listening who is the authority or the thought leader or the celebrity or one of the many other archetypes that I don't even know the full list of, we have to have our backstory and our overcoming hardship story. But when do we actually pull in people where they want to say, yes, I want to be on that bandwagon? Is that through the storytelling, or is that a completely different aspect of it?
Right. So there are a few ways we can approach this. Number one is kind of after you get that customer, you get to know them and like that kind of thing. But really, you can also do it at the very beginning of the relationship. So again, if you look at the traditional ways of trying to be a thought leader, what are you talking about? Well, you're going to sit down, you're going to write out your blog, and you're going to tell them how to do this and how to do that, and here are 3 keys for doing well at this thing, right? um And that's great if you want to be somebody's like encyclopedia. So one of the things we talk about is how do you sell your knowledge and expertise and information when everybody just looks everything up for free on Google anyway, right? Well, the difference is there's knowledge on demand, right? So, for example, I took my wife drives a Jeep Grand Cherokee. I take it in for an oil change. To go to the dealership because when we bought it, they were like, "Hey, we'll give you like 11 free oil changes." So I take it there, and of course, they change the oil, and then the person comes out with the clipboard, and they're like, "Ah, you've got these 7 things you need to work," you know. And so that free oil change, is going to cost you like $900, right? So, um, one of the things that they said is, well, your cabin air filter, the air filter that cleans the air that gets blown inside your car from the outside, that needs to be replaced because it's dirty, and you want to breathe clean air in your Jeep, don't you? You know, and Matt, that's only going to cost you $95. Like for an air filter, like you know. So I looked it up, and you can get one at the auto parts store for $17. And I go to YouTube in this case, and I Google, Jeep Grand Cherokee, cabin air filter, and here's like a 10-minute video where the guy tells you how to do it. And it only took 5 minutes of the 10-minute video to actually do it. And I'm like, well, for $17 and 5 minutes of my time, I'm not going to pay them $95 to do it. Screw them. So that's knowledge on demand, right? That's I want to do something. How do I do it? What we're talking about is a body of knowledge, and that's the kind of knowledge that changes your story. So it's not just um, how to do something; it's how to do something, but also we're going to open up all of these opportunities for transformation that you didn't have because there's all of this stuff that I can teach you. And so, to kind of get back to your original question, you're not looking for people that are just chasing down one thing. How do I do this? What about that? Well, what's the definition? Like that's the role of the dictionary, right? Or the encyclopedia. We're looking for another kind of knowledge altogether. So when you start writing about that knowledge and you write in a way in which you would speak with a friend. So maybe a little bit more unfiltered, a little bit more authentic than I'm the professional and I know something you don't. So here you go, right? I'm smarter than you. So here's, well, forget all that crap. Start actually revealing a bit of yourself and revealing the bit of yourself that is that attractive character that they aspire to. Things like that. That is the way that you start really building a following and really building that dedicated person who's gonna get on the ride and go off with you and do incredible things.
So, when you're working with authors or potential authors, do you recommend that they build the following before the book or they use the book to build the following or both? Either.
Both ways work, but one way is way better.
Which
Can I
one?
start that over? Both
Yeah.
ways work, but one way is way better.
Uh-huh.
And the way that is way better is the one where you build the following and sell the book. So the reason for that is, I used to have stats around here. I don't see my index card right now, but about how many books are coming out every year and what your chances are of like, being in the bookstore even, or,
Oh,
how many books, the average book in nonfiction sells under 3,000. In fact, I think it's maybe even under 1,000 if you're self-published, and a lot of people are going that route.
mm.
So it's really about building the audience and saying, okay, now I've got my book, go buy the book. And they do because you are a thought leader and they follow you. They do what they're told and they go buy the book.
Yeah.
So, and secondly, uh, there's an element there of why would you let people scratch that itch for only $20? Like the cost of a book, right? So a book is a great vehicle for certain reasons. And then again, there are different types of books. So there could be a book that it's more of a lead gen thing where you're really teaching people awareness of the problem and the fact that a solution exists and there's the opportunity for the solution. So go get that solution.
So for let's take the jargon out of it. We're using this situation is you're using the book in order to attract new leads, new potential customers. That's what you meant by lead gen thing.
You can do that. Right. Lead generation, right? And that is a very successful strategy. But you've got to realize that in nonfiction books, I'll give you one big tip. If you're going to do that, and if you're going to put some lead generation element in there, like, thank you for reading my book, go to my website and get this extra chapter, or, learn more, or get the resource guide, or that kind of thing. Don't put it at the end of the book, put it at the beginning, because it is very common for, now that we've got ebooks, right? We've got Kindles and things like that. We've got some real data about how people interact with books. And for nonfiction, it's very common to have a completion rate of the book in the single digits, 7%.
Wow.
So how many books do people buy that they never start reading, right? Okay, well, they've started reading. Great. What percentage of them that start are going to finish the book? Way small number. So yeah, that's something that you want to think about. You want to get that to deepen your relationship with me, do this thing. You want that really early on, because if you put it at the last chapter, they might not ever see it.
Yeah. I love this because I feel like a lot of people in my audience or who join my group program, like at least half of them, probably more than half of them, want to write a book or in the process of writing a book.
And that's great.
And
That's great.
I'm like, okay, amazing books are amazing. I also desire to write a book someday. But if you're not making enough money and like you're not happy with your revenue, like put that energy into something else right now.
That's a real long runway, and the other thing about books are, and this is maybe the biggest problem with one of the big problems with the book, is once you have a book and you've written your book and it says what it has to say, it's done. Well, but what are you going to do to have that conversation over the next 10, 20, 30 years? Like, that book can only go so far to have that conversation with your customer that you're going to have. So books are great. Books are wonderful. I read a ton of books. I buy even more books than I read, but you really have to ask yourself if that's the right thing right now. And the answer can be yes.
Yeah. Now I just want to ask you how many books you read on an average month.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I stopped. So this year has been different for me because I'm doing a lot of big reads. So yesterday I finished Anna Karenina, 1,000-something page novel, right? And that was just for fun. So, but I've also started reading some of the great books of Western civilization, starting with Homer and the Odyssey and the Iliad, and, going through that great books track. And what I mean by great books, it's not, hey, I'm saying this is a great book. There's actually like a body of books called the great books in Western civilization. So there's that. I read a lot of biographies of people that are authorities and kind of the world changers. Last year I read all of Shakespeare's plays. I'm right now reading a biography of every U.S. president in order. So I'm on Andrew Jackson right now. So I'm pretty early into that process. So I've got a lot going on. Weirdly, it wasn't until I had my stroke in 2018 that I started reading a ton. And I don't know why this is, But I mean, my brain is different than what it was,
Yeah.
after the stroke, because that's what happens to your brain. But I became this sponge and I just started reading so much more and absorbing so much more. And that's been a real blessing for me, as odd as it sounds. But yeah, so I read a ton. I recommend that everyone read a ton. This whole history thing, if you're in a business where you help people release weight, right? You're going to get healthy, get skinny, you're going to do all the physical things. Um, it amazes me when I see people in that business and they've never read the book, and I forget the title, the book by the founder of Weight Watchers. Her name was Jean Nidetek. Um, why wouldn't you read that book if like that's the business you're in? It's only the longest running, most successful, weight loss program ever in the history of mankind. So I
Speaking of
find myself
following.
yeah, right. I find myself pushing people to become students of their industry. And I'm constantly amazed and annoyed about how hard that is to do. Um, there's a great book I just picked up on Dale Carnegie, and kind of this whole self-help industry. I mean, he's like the OG of like, you know, self-help. Why wouldn't you want to know um about him and how he came to do what he did? So if you're serious enough about your work that having a generational impact appeals to you, then you should be serious enough to study the greats that have come before you, because everything they did for the most part still works today.
Mm, that's so good. How do you see that balancing with not wanting to um not wanting to do the same thing as everyone else in your industry and wanting to be innovative and finding inspiration outside of your industry?
There's that argument, right? Like, I mean, there's the story of, Amish barn building and how it hasn't changed in 300 years. All right. Even though we build barns differently than they did 300 years ago. Um, I respect that, but you cannot innovate with a lot of input. And what I really mean by that is if you look at the real innovators, what they were doing, what they are doing today, right now, as we're speaking, is they're taking something from one world and applying it to another world,
Mhm.
right? And that's where the innovation comes from. It's, well, how do I connect this to that in a way that nobody's done before?
Yeah.
Um, but you've got to know what's worked in the past and what was good about what worked in the past so you can take something else to add to that.
Mhm.
So, especially if you're just starting out, if you don't already have like a school of thought, like if you haven't figured out how to be that unique and special person yet, then you have no business trying to be different from the people that made it work.
Mhm. Yeah. This is such interesting timing because I have a client who's putting out a limited. She teaches life coaches marketing, and she's putting out a limited podcast series with a peer that's all on the different philosophies and the different uh, influences that created what is now the life coaching industry, and which is like
Oh, fascinating.
a lot of what you're talking about with
So
seeing.
I hope that they're talking about like Werner Erhard, who started Est, which was this big thing back in the 70s and 80s. That's the kind of thing, So if you want to learn about that and the coaching industry and all that, there's a book. It's been out of print for a while, so you're probably going to pay through the nose to get it. But it's called The Book of Est, EST, like best without the B.
Oh.
Um, you want to see what those people did and how it came to be, because everything that worked then will work now. And one great quote from Werner Erhard, the guy that founded it, is he said, "We preach independence, but we sell codependence."
Mm, yeah.
Right. And that's kind of a thing in the life coach world, unfortunately, is,
Yeah.
you they'll sell one thing and then really fulfill something different.
Mhm.
And I probably shouldn't have said that about life
No, 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 no,
coaches.
no. There's a million different types of coaching and a million different styles, but you definitely see a lot of coaches creating codependent relationships with their clients and not empowering them with tools that allow them to really thrive without
You
them.
know, but this brings up something that I kind of hoped would come up in some form or fashion, Sam, and that is kind of the morality of all of this.
Oh, so
You
good.
know, like I talk a lot about propaganda.
Mhm.
I talk a lot about manipulation, and those are all dirty words,
I
and
actually
they
love
can be,
using
yeah, I love them, right? And
yeah.
they can be dirty concepts
Yeah,
if that's what you make them into.
yeah,
But there's just this level of we're going to have a real conversation about how the brain works and what people respond to, and that's what we're going to do. And we're going to do it in a way that you know and I know is good for the person that you're doing it to,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
But people can get a little squeamish about that.
Yeah. No, I literally talk about manipulation for good through in the context of copywriting because, like,
Yeah, right.
a lot of people are stuck in their own life. They don't have supportive people around them, and they have a dream, or they don't even realize that they have a dream. And you, as the leader, can be the person who reaches out to them and gives them the motivation or the belief in order for them to really step into who they want to be. And that's manipulation for good.
Sure is. Well, the old joke about that is, you know, when you do it to me, it's manipulation, but when I do it to you, it's persuasion, right? But yeah, copywriting is definitely one of those things where you've got to get in and play in that area that people think but don't say, you know? And that's uncomfortable. You've really got to get a little raw sometimes
Mhm.
to make your message really hit home.
Yeah. Yeah, and really believe in people's potential to change.
Since that wasn't a question, I'm just going to let you have that point. And
No,
but you're right.
I it's something
If
that
you
you go, please.
if you didn't believe in the ability for someone to change, you would never do any of the stuff we do, Sam.
Yeah.
You'd go find another job. You go be a school teacher or something, whatever you want to do. I don't know. Go be a nurse. They need nurses badly right now.
Really, like
So
when I was 19, I remember so strongly that I did not people believe people could change. It was like I remember it as like a core belief in me, and I would argue the point. I was a very angry person at that point in
I
my life.
remember I remember feeling that way at a certain point in my life, and maybe I still do to an extent. I realize how hard it is to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's true. But yeah, I don't know if it came from a place of anger with me, but there's definitely you may have had the story where you really wanted someone to change and they didn't.
Mhm.
I kind of had the story of you're not going to change, so I'm going to go find someone that is where you need to be.
Oof.
You know, which was it sounds more cold-hearted
Yeah.
than it was, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I just so I believe that so strongly. It wasn't that long ago in the context of a human life. So I just I know that other people truly believe them in their heart of hearts that people can't change. So of course they wouldn't believe that they can change. That's so sad.
Transformation is just one of those things that's at the root. It's why anyone buys anything. Transformation in terms of status or in terms of the quality of or ease of their life in terms of who they're going through life with. Um, if it wasn't for that, we would all lead very different existences.
Mhm.
And I think that um, even your most cynical person believes in change, in some way. I've recently gone through this thing where um, I can't tell you how many, like you can't see them. I've got a whole box of planners and notebooks and like, this is the one I'm going to buy this thing and I'm going to be organized with it. And I'm going to, and each time thinking that purchase was going to make that transformation happen.
Uh-huh.
And it wasn't until something inside me transformed, which could come out and be expressed through a new planner or a new
So what changed?
system. What's that?
What changed?
What changed? I don't know that it ever has.
Oh, okay. So it has
don't
not
know.
changed yet.
You called me on my bluff there, I think. But yeah, and in fact, we had I just looked over at a note card I made a while back. Um, it was, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago when we were at a mastermind virtually because you couldn't leave Hawaii at the time, and I wrote down this index card about selling transformation and how, like, the 3 steps to making that happen, like a pattern interrupt, a plan, and then a formula to anchor people's thoughts and all that. And I was like, yeah, that, I wrote it down and kept it here on my desk because it was such an important part of what we do,
Yeah.
to key into the desire for change. And it was kind of a transformation within me and how I look at how I talk about what I do.
Mm.
So
So how does propaganda fit into this?
so propaganda is an interesting topic. um the word propaganda actually is really old. It came from like the 1620s. The Catholic Church actually came out with it, and it was not anything nefarious or manipulative at the time. It was kind of in reaction to the Renaissance and a lot of new scientific thought, and how was the church going to address that? And so propaganda was simply a way for standing up for their truth, and this is what we believe, and this is the good things about what we believe, and I'm just going to lay that out there and tell you that propaganda, and then it kind of died off. It had another tick up around Civil War times, and then propaganda really got this bad reputation around World War I, when the Allies started using propaganda to manipulate countries into getting into the war,
Mm.
and sending your soldiers off to fight and all this kind of thing. And since then it's had a bad reputation, but it always, it always didn't have that until then. um so propaganda is basically the mass audience control. It has to do with an emotionally based, one-sided style of communication. So you're not trying to be fair, you're not trying to be balanced or anything like that. You're trying to make a very emotional appeal to a mass audience, and get them to first have a feeling and then a thought and then take action.
Mhm.
So it's a big deal in my world, and it's a big deal in terms of that. One of the people that originally, so propaganda gets this bad reputation, and then this guy Edward Bernays comes out, and he wrote a couple of books. One was called Propaganda, another was called Crystallizing Public Opinion, both of which were written, like, nearly 100 years ago now. Bernays was a nephew of Sigmund Freud, kind of an interesting family connection there. And he wrote this book called Propaganda, which was all about sort of an apologetic for propaganda, and like, look at the good things that can happen from propaganda and all of this. And then he followed up with the Crystallizing Public Opinion book, and he failed in his quest to make propaganda feel like a good thing. And then he really felt bad when, after World War II ended, they raided the bunker, and Hitler's big propaganda guy, this big guy that orchestrated a lot of this, they found Bernays' books like in his things and realized that he used a lot of those techniques to like do
Oh
the whole
my
Nazi thing.
gosh.
And Bernays was Jewish, and so he felt terrible about that. So he moves to America at that point, and he changes the name of propaganda and what he taught into public relations.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, right. So,
Little did you know if you're studying PR in college.
right, it's got its origins in Nazi manipulation and crowd control. It's terrible. So, yeah,
But I mean, I'm guessing your underlying opinion is you can use propaganda for good.
absolutely, absolutely. You know, and he tries to make that point in his book. Um, it's honestly just like anything else. It's, you know, taking the attention of people, their interests, their desires, and turning them into action. You know, which again, I just quoted a marketing formula without knowing that. You know, the AIDA. You
Mhm.
know, attention, interest, desire, action. Which you can see in the first time I saw it probably was in that movie Glengarry Glen Ross, when Alec Baldwin walks into the room of the okay, well, you don't need to watch the movie, but you do need to watch the one scene, and you can find it on YouTube. It's like 3 or 4 minutes, and it's Alec Baldwin, who really wasn't in the movie except for this one scene, and he walks in and he shouts at these salesmen who were there to sell like timeshares or something like that.
Oh, a young Alec Baldwin.
It's kind of a shocking scene, and
Wait, I'm watching it right
Adding a
now.
little something to this month's sales contest. As you all know, first prize Cadillac Eldorado. Anybody want to see second prize? Second prize is a steak knives. Third prize is your fire. A, B, C. A always B, B, C closing. Always be closing. Always be closing. AIDA, attention, interest, decision, action. Attention, do I have your attention? Interest, are you interested? I know you are, because it's fuck or walk. You close or you hit the bricks. Decision, have you made your decision for Christ? AIDA, get out there. You got the prospects coming in. You think they came in to get out of the rain? The guy don't walk on the lot unless he wants to buy. Sitting out there waiting to give you their money, but you're going to take it.
I feel so motivated. Oh, that's great.
he at some point like takes off his watch and is like,
Emergency sleeping bag.
Okay, please.
what did you say? Yeah, the look of horror on your face.
Kept going. I was like, stop it. Okay.
At one point, he takes off his watch and makes a point like, you know, this watch is worth more than your car, to one of these salesmen. So do what you're told. Anyway, it's yeah, it's a crazy scene. And then he walks out of the scene, and I don't think you see him again in the movie. He's just there for that speech.
Just gotta watch that every day and get motivated.
Yeah, right. In the sales world, that's like legendary, man. I mean, they all talk about that.
Always be closing. I've definitely heard people say that.
Well, yeah, right. So anyway, I think we got pretty far afield from whatever your last.
I know. I was like, where were we? Propaganda.
Yeah, propaganda.
Okay. Well, I normally close with some very magical questions, Matt, but I'm not gonna put you through the ringer about like asking about your astrology and
I'm an Aries.
practice. Oh, you're an Aries.
I know that.
Okay, cool. And I guess do you do any daily rituals that support your business or just your being?
Oh my gosh. You know, right now I've been in this thing. I try to drink a gallon of water a day. It's not very magical though, but it's definitely something I try to do. You know, in terms of really kind of bringing in a sense of inspiration and that kind of thing. I can't say that I do, and I want to, but I don't. I have been so resistant to morning routines and habit lists and all of that. It's been really difficult for me to implement any of those things in a way that is sustainable for me.
Yeah.
And
I've given up stuff with stuff.
that's maybe sad, but it is what it is. Meditation has been very good for me when I do it.
Mhm.
And what I learned about meditation was I use this app called Headspace.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've heard of it, but that's what I use. And it's so much not what people say meditation is. It's not about emptying your mind and staring at the wall or closing your eyes and saying om or anything like that. It's been for me something very much like tuning an instrument.
But you can't keep it as a sustainable habit.
Yeah, I just fall off the wagon, man.
I mean, so I'm the same way. I like for the life of me can't keep a continual practice of anything. So I've just committed to doing something that makes me feel better every day. And
Well, I
that's
know you're taking your walks on the beach now with the dog.
I know
Like that's kind of a big thing.
that's been like a couple weeks of that. So that's not a
It's awesome.
it's just I've just kind of embraced that I'm not gonna be someone who's gonna be like, I'm gonna do 1,000 days of meditation every single day. I'm just gonna choose one thing a day that feels good and that's perfect for me.
Hey, that's great.
Mhm.
That's great. I've got a list of things. I've been working on it this week. I've got a list of like a half dozen things I want to do every day. But then I'm like, that's like 2 hours a day if I
I
did
know.
all
I was
that.
like, I couldn't do that. Oh my gosh.
I don't have that kind of time. You kidding me? So yeah.
You can't imagine people in this like my space specifically, it's 10 times worse than that too. There's so much guilt that can actually be tied to that of like, I have to do this and I have to do that, I have to do the meditation and I have to do the salt bath and I have to do the yoga and then I have to do the mantras and then I have to like do the journaling and
Journaling.
yeah,
Oh gosh.
like the list of 10 things and then you're like 4 hours of the day for like self-care and then
Right?
it's like flagellation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky enough to try to get all the reading done that I do, and that's kind of where it's at. And I've been trying to pare things down a little bit and just be simpler. What I want to do is just make things simpler so that I can build a schedule, like a very regular schedule that I can stick to.
Why do you want that?
That's where I'm at because, well, no one in your world will have read this book, but there was the Extreme Ownership book by the Navy SEAL Jocko Willink, and he talks about how discipline equals freedom.
Mm. I've heard him
And
on interviews before, but I've not read the book.
yeah, right. Well, I mean, it's one of the chapters of his book is all about, if you really want to like free up your time, schedule your time. Don't try to keep your schedule blank because that time will all slip away and you'll be doing something stupid, you know? So it's the appointments with yourself thing, it's the time blocking thing, it's the, sticking to a schedule and scripting your day. And that sounds wonderful. And gee, if only I could do it.
I've tried doing stuff like that and I do like some contact like version of that on a weekly basis, but it is really hard. It's like so much discipline. Oh my goodness. To not to like I said I was gonna take 30 minutes on this thing, but I have a few like I want to make it like there's like little things I want to tweak on it and oh so hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you have so many planners you can apply this to.
I can, man. I have a different planner for every day of the week.
Okay, so one little question I wanted to hear from you before we go, which is who's the most bizarre historical figure who has blown your mind, whose story has blown your mind? Do you have one that comes?
Bizarre. Um, Well, I can give you a bizarre figure, or I can give you a bizarre kind of a spin on a person that everyone has heard of.
Either one.
And so the bizarre character from history is one, they wrote a book about him called Making Them Believe. It was Dr. John Brinkley, and he was the first person to advertise on radio, period. And and this is going to get a little PG-13. Do you mind?
Oh, we
You
don't
can have.
mind.
So
Believe me.
he in the early 1900s, he had a hospital that he
Uh-huh.
established kind of here in the Midwest, and people came from all over the country. Men came from all over the country because they needed Viagra before it was invented. I'll just put
Wow.
it that way.
Uh-huh.
And he had this bizarre surgery where he would take goat testicles and implant them in these men.
Oh my gosh.
And this apparently like really worked. It's quackery, but they thought it really worked well. And he actually did a number of things in marketing the solution that was way ahead of its time. Way ahead of its time.
Was a
Uh,
laundry marketed on the radio?
yeah, well, what he did was he actually bought time at a lot of Mexican stations that beamed into the United States. Basically, the what is it? What am I thinking of here? Is it the I want to say it was the American Medical Association, but it could be something else. I'm going to have to brush up on this. But basically, there was some government organization or a non-government organization like the AMA, I forget who it was, that we still have today, that was basically established to put him out of business because like the real doctors were like, dude, like we gotta get rid of you, and so he was a crazy innovative marketer, and obviously there's like the weirdness element to it. um pretty cool, story there, making them believe. And there was another book about him that I'm not remembering right now. I'm going to look it up as I'm talking to you about it, but it was more of a biography of him. um so that, and I'll get back to which one that was. uh so that's the most bizarre character I think that I've run across.
I love it.
Uh,
Yeah, I knew you'd have someone.
let's see here. As far as a bizarre story about someone that you've heard of, I'm going to have to go with, Abraham Lincoln would be a big influence on my life. And interestingly, he is the person I cite probably the most for my Messiah archetype.
Okay.
And I call him sometimes the American Jesus, which is like really weird and perhaps irreligious. And I respect people a lot and maybe agree with them that take exception to that description. But let's look at the circumstances. Both of them were born without any real expectations in their lives. Both of them had a woman named Mary in their lives that played an outsized role in their lives. Both murdered on Good Friday. It just the list kind of goes on and on.
Wow.
And so Lincoln was an amazing persuader, an amazing leader. Anytime they do one of those polls of rank the presidents, he's always at the top or very near it. So that would be someone that I think has really meant a lot to me as kind of a thought leader. And
So what's the bizarre spin or the bizarre story?
well, I think it's just the fact that his his story matched kind of the story of Jesus so closely in a lot of ways. And that to me was like, wow, really? And no one's really written about that in ways that I've been able to find.
You guys, you heard it here first.
You heard it here first, right? So that's something. Maybe I'll write my Lincoln book about that one of these days. But Lincoln actually, another kind of thing in common between the two is if you look at all the books ever written in the English language, who were they written about? Number one, it's Jesus. Number two, Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
So there are probably 20,000 books in print about Abraham Lincoln that have been in print. Yeah.
Wow. Well.
So,
Jesus,
it's
American Jesus.
it's an outsized influence, really for what he did. On paper, he was probably the least qualified man ever to be president. And yet the country relied on him during a terribly trying time. And, a real American crossroads in history. And what a crossroads it was.
So everyone, you can go to educatedauthority.com/quiz to hear if you're a messiah or not.
Right.
See if you need to learn more from Lincoln. And where else can people find you online, Matt?
I've got something actually at the same website, but educatedauthority.com/newsletter. I'm coming out with a newsletter, which is going to turn into a paid physical newsletter. It's called Authority Gold. And it's all about helping experts turn into authorities and raise up that lifetime customer value. So I think it's really going to be very useful to a lot of your audience. I'm doing a few free preview issues in PDF form electronically right now. And so I would encourage your group, while that is still available, to go ahead and take advantage of that, because there's going to be a lot of good stuff in there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. This is so great. And I'm just really appreciative of how generous you were with your insight and your time. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
It's been my pleasure. I hope that the next guy on the podcast, whenever that may be,
someday,
we'll have a good act to follow, Do
you have any final words of wisdom for all of us?
Yeah, I do. And it really goes back to that 100-year goal. We didn't get too much into the story, but when I had my stroke in 2018, totally fine now, but it was pretty scary when it happened. And one of the things that I realized really fast was that not enough good things in the world had happened because I was in it. And that was a really sad and upsetting realization to me. So I would encourage people to think about what they're doing today, what they're doing in their career and in their business, that's going to matter 100 years from now. And I think that one of the best things you can do is to become a thought leader so that you can help other people achieve their 100-year goals.
So good. Okay, well, get on that, everyone.
Get on that.
Get on that. And we will see you next week.